There is a kind of love that does not arrive with noise. It does not announce itself at the door with flowers or speeches or the dramatic timing of a film. It simply settles in, quietly, without ceremony, the way morning light fills a room before anyone has thought to open the curtains. That was the love that existed between Adiz and Minjun, and in the beginning, neither of them understood how rare it was, or how completely it was about to be tested. Minjun had come to Lagos from Seoul 3 years earlier, sent by his firm to oversee their West African investment expansion. He had prepared for the city, the heat, the traffic, the pace of a place that does not slow down for anyone. What he had not prepared for was her. She was warm where Lagos was loud, grounded where everything around him was unpredictable. She laughed before he finished his sentences, which he found irritating and then irresistible, and then, in that order, completely necessary. They had been building a life together quietly, between 2 languages, 2 cultures, 2 families on opposite ends of the world who each carried their own idea of what his future was supposed to look like. But inside the small world they had made together, none of that could reach them. Not yet. Minjun was generous in the way that people are when they have never known lack, freely, without calculation, without keeping score. He gave without thinking about it, and Lagos received him warmly in return. He had a name that opened doors, a title that filled rooms, a bank account that made him easy to love. He did not know yet that all 3 of these things were doing work. He did not fully understand. Adiz understood. She had watched it her entire life, the difference between people who came for what you had and people who came for who you were. She observed the dinner parties, the handshakes, the men who called themselves his friends and refilled his glass with one hand and noted his assets with the other. She said nothing about what she saw. She filed it away in the quiet part of her mind that had always kept an accurate record. His mother in Seoul had opinions. She called every Sunday and asked the questions that carried other questions inside them. When are you coming home? Who is this woman, Minjun? What is your plan? He answered the first question each time and stepped over the others. Not because he was ashamed, because some things cannot be explained to someone who has already made up their mind. The deal had been building for 18 months. The Eco-Atlantic project, a major partnership with a Seoul-based investment group that Minjun had assembled piece by piece, in boardrooms and on phone calls, and in the deliberate, patient way of a man who believed in what he was building. It was his largest undertaking. It was also, he believed, his safest. The partners were known. The numbers were verified. He had done everything correctly. Some betrayals do not arrive wearing the face of an enemy. They arrive in the shape of a handshake, of someone who knows your name and has sat at your table, of trust extended over months, until the moment it is used against you. When his assistant James came to the office that afternoon holding the quarterly reports, Minjun could see from across the room that something was wrong. James was the kind of young man who carried good news easily. He was not carrying it easily. The numbers told the story without mercy. The Seoul partners had misappropriated the funds. The deal had collapsed. An investigation had begun. His personal accounts, tied structurally to the investment, were frozen. The amount lost was not small. The timeline for resolution was not clear. He sat very still for a long time after James left the room. Outside his window, Lagos continued its noise. The city does not pause for anyone's private disaster. He called her from the office before he had figured out what to say. That was the thing about Adiz. She was the person he called before he had the words. She did not panic when he told her. She did not fill the silence with reassurances she would have to take back later. She simply asked if he was physically okay, told him to come home, and said it with the specific certainty of a woman who has already decided what the next step is and is waiting for you to catch up. When he walked through the door, she was there, not performing calm, actually calm. She did not ask about the numbers or the investigation or what came next. She sat with him in the quiet of the small apartment and let him be a person who did not have to perform being fine. That was rarer than he knew how to say. Later that evening, she told him something he would return to many times in the months ahead. She told him that she had not built her life around his portfolio. That what she had chosen, what she chose, every morning, over and over, was him. The actual him, not the version that arrived in a car and walked into rooms and filled them. The version sitting across from her now, without answers, in a small apartment in Lagos at night, trying to find his way back to himself. His mother heard within 2 days. Word moved through the family network with the speed of something that has been waiting for a reason to travel. She called before he had decided what to tell her, which meant the conversation began before he was ready for it. She was not an unkind woman. She was a careful one. Her love for her son had always expressed itself through solutions, practical, structural, the kind of love that builds scaffolding. Come home. Come back to Seoul. We will fix this as a family properly. She meant every word. But her version of fixing things required him to leave the city he had made his own, and the woman who had become the center of that city for him. He told her he was not leaving. He said it calmly, with the patience of someone who has already decided and is simply sharing information. She did not accept it immediately. But she heard something in his voice that had not been there before, a steadiness that was different from stubbornness, something quieter, something that sounded, uncomfortably, like a man who knew his own mind. She told him to call tomorrow. He said he would. They both understood that the conversation had not ended, but something in it had shifted. The social world contracted faster than he had expected. Within a week, invitations stopped arriving. Within 2, calls grew shorter. Within a month, people he had known for years had reorganized themselves around someone else's table. He observed each departure with a detachment that surprised him, the calm of a man receiving a diagnosis rather than a betrayal. The information was painful. It was also, he understood, useful. There was one evening that clarified everything. A couple he had considered genuine friends, people he had shared meals and celebrations and confidences with, summoned him to a restaurant to explain that his name needed to be removed from a charitable committee. For optics, just temporarily. You understand. He thanked them. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He walked out through the restaurant and into the car park and stood in the night air and realized that the feeling he had was not grief. It was clarity. He called Adiz from the car park. She asked where he was. He said he was on his way home, and the word home had never carried what it carried in that moment, the weight of a place that would not change based on a balance sheet, a place where what he was mattered more than what he had. He drove toward it the way people drive toward things they need. Adiz's mother noticed before anyone said anything directly. Mama Ngozi was a woman who had raised daughters in Lagos for 3 decades, which meant she could read a face, a phone call, a pot of soup, and a silence all at the same time, and arrive at the truth through all 4 simultaneously. She called Adiz in one afternoon, closed the kitchen door behind them, and asked one question, not about Minjun's money, not about the investigation, not about what came next. She looked at her daughter and asked where she stood. Adiz did not hesitate. She said she was not going anywhere, just that. No performance, no explanation, no list of reasons. The kind of certainty that does not require justification because it was never based on a calculation. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said to bring him for dinner that weekend. That a man should not be suffering and eating badly at the same time. That was too much for one person to carry. Adiz laughed the way that people laugh when they have been holding something for too long and something small releases the pressure. Her mother had always known. She had simply needed to look her daughter in the eye first and confirm what she already suspected. James was 26, from Ibadan, and had put himself through university through scholarships and part-time work, and the kind of quiet refusal to accept that where you start determines where you end. He was the sort of person who arrived before he was expected and stayed after he was needed, and asked questions that were sharper than most people's answers. When the crisis came, he had options. His record was clean, and his abilities were visible, and any firm in Lagos would have read his name on an application with interest. He could have been gone within a week. Instead, he walked into the office on a Tuesday morning and told Minjun he was staying, not for a reduced salary, without a salary, for as long as it took. He said, when Minjun asked him why, that some people show their character in good seasons, and he wanted to show his in a difficult one. There was no drama in how he said it, no negotiation, no performance of sacrifice. He had made his decision privately and was now simply informing someone of it. That specific, ordinary, extraordinary thing, a young man choosing loyalty over comfort when no one would have judged him for leaving, was one of the things Minjun returned to most often in the years afterward when he thought about what the difficult season had taught him. He sold the first car, then the second. He moved from the large apartment into a smaller one. He watched his previous life pack itself into boxes and be driven away in vehicles that were no longer his. His phone became quieter. The dinner invitations stopped arriving. The names in his contacts that had once responded within minutes now took days, then weeks, then stopped responding at all. None of this was as devastating as he had expected it to be. Not because it did not hurt, it did, but because every evening there was food on the table and a woman on the other side of it who looked at him in exactly the same way she had always looked at him, as if the things that had been removed were decorations and the person sitting across from her was what had always been real. She never said the word before. She never pointed at the difference between what had been and what currently was. She moved into the smaller apartment with the same energy she had brought to the larger one and made it warm in that particular way she had, through cooking and color and the sound of her voice in a room. And he understood, in a way he had not been capable of understanding before, that this was actually what a home was. Not a size, a presence. He began rebuilding the way things can only be rebuilt after a genuine collapse, without shortcuts, without the bravado of someone performing a comeback. Just one careful decision at a time, in a small rented office with 2 desks and a shared printer, and the kind of focused quiet that only comes when there is nothing left to perform for. He reached out to people he had not spoken to in years, not the ones from the dinner party circuit, but people who had known him before the title and the car and the floor-to-ceiling windows. Former colleagues who remembered what his judgment was like before it had been made comfortable by success. A handful of investors who measured people more by how they moved through difficulty than by what they had accumulated during ease. He was honest with all of them. He said what had happened and what he believed he could build. He did not oversell. He did not hide. Real humility, not the strategic kind, but the kind that comes from having been genuinely broken and changed by it, has a sound that people who are paying attention can hear. The people who mattered heard it in him. And slowly, without fanfare, she came to the office on a Thursday afternoon without calling ahead. She had food in a flask and the matter-of-fact manner of a woman who had decided that whatever he was going through, he was not going through it without eating properly. James let her in and gestured apologetically. She waved the apology away, set the flask on the desk, found a chair, and waited. When he finished the call he was on, she opened the flask and handed him a spoon and told him to eat before he said a single word about work. He ate. She did not fill the silence around him. She let him have it, the rare, necessary quiet of being with someone who does not need you to explain yourself or perform recovery. Someone who simply sits with you in the actual reality of things. When he finished, he set the bowl down and looked at her for a moment without speaking. He said he did not understand how she did it. She asked what he meant. He said she made everything feel like it was going to be fine. She said it was because it was going to be fine, she had already decided. He just needed to catch up. He almost smiled. She took the empty bowl. But no one told him about a hard season, what he had not read in any of the books that talk about resilience and rebuilding, and the character that difficulty produces, was that the difficult season does not end cleanly. There is no single morning when you wake up and feel that it is over. It fades instead. Gradually, over ordinary evenings and unremarkable meals, the weight of it becomes something you carry with less effort. And then one day you realize you are not carrying it consciously at all. That it has become part of the terrain of who you are. He also discovered things about himself that the comfortable years had not shown him, that he was funnier than he had known, slower to anger, more impatient with other people's struggles, because he now understood what it felt like to struggle and not be able to explain it to anyone who had not been through it. He discovered that he liked walking Lagos at night when the city cooled down and Adiz pointed out things he had passed 100 times without noticing. He discovered that the version of himself without the money was genuinely, unexpectedly, someone he liked. And he made a quiet decision that when the money returned, he would not trade this version in. He would carry him forward. He had earned him. 6 months into the rebuild, a small investor came through. Clean money, modest in scale, real in intention. When James called to confirm the transfer, Minjun was in the car. He pulled over to a side street. He sat with the engine running while Lagos moved around him, and he held the phone in both hands and processed what it meant to have come back from a place that had felt, at certain points, like a place with no way out. He thought about what the season had cost. The accounts, the cars, the apartment, the people who had shown him precisely who they were by leaving. And then he thought about what it had returned, himself, James, and Adiz who had not left, which meant the season had not cost him her, it had only shown him what she was, That was not a cost. That was the most valuable thing he had ever received without paying for it. He called her before he called anyone else. When she answered and he told her, her response was so loud and immediate that James, still in the office blocks away, heard it through the phone and later described the sound as a woman who had always known something and was now being proven right. He had been thinking about proposing, which was exactly what it was. He knew what he wanted to say. He had rehearsed it, which Adiz later told him she had noticed, because she noticed everything, and that he had become thoughtful in an unusual way, which was slightly suspicious because he was normally thoughtful about deals, and recently he had been thoughtful about things like where they were going for the weekend and whether she preferred gold or silver, and that was not a question with a neutral answer. He did not tell her where they were going the evening he had planned it. She pushed back. She did not like surprises, or rather she liked to claim she did not like surprises while consistently receiving them well. She asked 3 times. He said to trust him. She said that was not an answer. He said it was the only one he had. When they arrived on the rooftop, she went quiet. He had not overdone it, no theatrical gestures, nothing borrowed from a film, just the right light. Just the city she had grown up in, spread out below them, enormous and indifferent and beautiful. She turned and looked at him, and he saw that she already knew. She had probably known before he had finished deciding. He told her the truth, which was the only thing he had ever given her consistently. He told her that before her, he had been living well but not really living, that the money had given him comfort, and the comfort had convinced him he was whole, and that the crisis had stripped the comfort away and left him with himself, and what he had found in that self, once she had shown him it was worth finding, was something he was proud of in a way the money had never allowed him to be. He told her that every person who had left in the hard season had done him a service they had not intended. They had cleared away everything that was not real so that what was real could be seen plainly. And what was real was her, present, steady, choosing him not because of what he provided, but because of who he was. That was the most profound thing anyone had ever done for him, and it was a thing he intended to spend the rest of his life being worthy of. Then he went down on one knee, and Lagos held its breath. She said yes. She also said several other things first, specifically that he had reorganized her kitchen without being invited to do so, and that the previous arrangement had been perfectly logical, and that she was still not entirely over it. He said her name in the patient tone of a man who was trying to get to the important part. She said obviously yes. She said to get up from the floor. He stood. He put the ring on her finger. She held his face in both her hands and looked at him the way she had always looked at him, completely, without reservation, the way you look at something you have fully chosen and intend to go on choosing. She told him he had always been worth staying for. She told him he just needed to believe it too. Below them, Lagos continued its noise. The traffic, the generators, the music from somewhere distant, the 10,000 overlapping dramas of a city that does not stop. But on that rooftop, something had been finished and named. And they stood above the city they had. News of the engagement moved quickly through both families. Adiz's younger sister called before they had left the rooftop, which suggested she had been waiting by the phone. Their mother cried twice, once during the call and once, she later admitted, separately in her room, which she denied, but which Adiz did not challenge, because some denials deserve their privacy. Minjun's mother received the news differently. She was not a woman who celebrated loudly. But she was quiet in a way that was different from her usual strategic quiet. This was the quiet of someone processing something that had landed in a way they had not fully prepared for. Before they hung up, she said something that stopped him. She said she would like to come to Lagos, not on a video call, not through photographs. She wanted to come in person, to the city, to the place where the relationship had actually been built. He said of course. She arrived on a Wednesday, with little notice. Minjun suspected the short notice was deliberate. She was a careful woman, and she understood that a prepared visit reveals very little about how people actually live. She wanted to see things as they were. When Adiz opened the door, the two women looked at each other in the specific way of people who have known about each other for a long time, but are meeting for the first time. History, assumption, and curiosity all operating simultaneously behind composed faces. Adiz stepped back and welcomed her in without ceremony. His mother entered slowly and looked around the small apartment, the African print on the wall, the books on the side table, the evidence of 2 lives organized into a modest space with care. She noted that it was clean. She noted that it smelled of cooking. She noted that it felt, in the specific way that matters, like a home. She sat at the table. Adiz offered her food. She accepted, and in that small acceptance, quietly and without fanfare, something began. The conversation between the two women happened on the second evening, alone in the apartment while Minjun was occupied in the next room. His mother initiated it. She did not start with small talk. She said she had not been kind, not to Adiz's face, but about her. She had said things, to her son and to others, that were not fair to a woman she had never met. She acknowledged this plainly, without excessive apology, but with genuine accountability. Adiz thanked her, and did not pretend the acknowledgement was unnecessary. Then his mother said something that Adiz had not expected. She said that a mother learns most about her child not through what they achieve, but through who they become. That her son's voice had changed during the hard season, not weaker, but steadier, more rooted in something real, and she had come to Lagos to understand what had produced that change. And now that she was sitting here, across from the woman who had stayed when leaving would have been easy and reasonable and entirely forgivable, she understood. She reached across the table and briefly touched Adiz's hand. She said to take care of him. Adiz said she already was. Neither of them said anything after that for a while. And in that silence, something that had been waiting a long time was, without ceremony, finally resolved. She stayed 3 days. On the first evening, she tasted jollof rice and did not comment. On the second, she asked how the spice balance worked. On the third morning, she stood at the stove beside Adiz and attempted to cook, and Adiz corrected her grip on the spoon twice, which she accepted without protest, which Minjun later described as the most remarkable thing he had ever witnessed from his mother. There is a language that exists between women who are learning each other across a significant difference. It moves through food, through kitchen tasks, through the small movements of a shared domestic space. It is not fast and it is not loud, but it is honest. By the time she left on Thursday morning, standing at the door with her luggage, as composed as she had arrived, something between them had been established. Something that would take root slowly and grow into what neither of them would have predicted at the start. She hugged Adiz at the door. It was brief and slightly formal and entirely real. Minjun, watching from the corridor, had to turn away so that neither of them would see his face. The wedding planning became, as wedding planning tends to, its own separate drama with entirely its own momentum. Two mothers, one from Lagos, one from Seoul, who had lived their whole lives in cultures with firm opinions about ceremony, now had to agree on the shape of a celebration for a union that neither culture had a direct template for. They did not agree easily, but they agreed with remarkable energy. Minjun and Adiz stayed largely outside of it. Not because they were uninterested, they were deeply interested, but because they had learned that some conversations move faster without them, and also because watching their mothers argue across a language barrier about event catering and the correct order of ceremonies was producing more genuine laughter than anything else in recent memory. What they understood, watching from a distance, was that beneath the disagreement was something they had both wanted without saying it out loud. Their mothers were engaged. With each other, with the planning, with the future being built, the arguments were a form of investment, of two women deciding that this marriage was worth having opinions about. That was more than enough. The ceremony was held on a Saturday in Lagos. It began with a traditional Igbo introduction, a process the Park family approached with the focused attention of people who had researched it thoroughly and still understood less than they intended to, but who were determined to honor every moment of it. His mother had acquired the correct attire. She had memorized the correct gestures. She got some things right and some things slightly wrong, and the family received her with the warmth that Lagos families bring to the honest effort of someone trying. The church ceremony that followed was quieter, clean and simple, as Adiz had wanted. She wore ivory. He wore a suit he had purchased before the crisis and kept through all the selling and the downsizing, the one thing he had not been willing to let go. He told her about it afterward, what it had meant to hold on to it. She said she had noticed the suit early on and had wondered. Now she knew. They were married by late afternoon, in the specific golden light that comes to Lagos when the Harmattan has passed, and the air is clear, and the city looks, briefly, like a place of complete and uncomplicated beauty. The reception was the kind of evening that Lagos produces when it decides to celebrate properly, full and loud, and lit up, and without any restraint whatsoever. The music was very loud, and the food was very good, and both things continued for longer than the venue had technically agreed to. James was at the table closest to the front, which was where Min-jun had placed him deliberately. He sat with his wife beside him and watched the room with the expression of a young man who had made the right choice at the right time and was now watching the evening that grew from it. He had been given a title in the new company that Min-jun had invented because it was the most accurate description available. He was the person who made everything work. At some point in the evening, nobody could precisely identify when the two mothers ended up on the dance floor at the same time. Mama Ngozi was already in full motion. His mother stood at the edge of the floor and watched. Then, after a period of observation that suggested she was conducting a risk assessment, she stepped in. Mama Ngozi saw her and took her hand. They danced together. The room noticed. Phones came out. The photograph that resulted was framed and hung in two homes on opposite sides of the world. Late in the evening, before the last hour of dancing, Min-jun and Adiz slipped away briefly to a corridor outside the main hall. Not to escape, just to be still in the middle of everything for a moment. They could hear their families through the wall. The music, the laughter, the specific sound of two worlds that had decided they could occupy the same room and had discovered, to everyone's genuine surprise, that they not only could but rather enjoyed it. She said she had not thought it would feel like this. He asked her what she meant. She said she had imagined the wedding many times, the details, the dress, the day, but not this particular feeling. The specific feeling of having come through something difficult together and arrived on the other side of it whole. He said he understood. He said the hard season had not felt like it had a purpose while they were inside it. She said that was the point of hard seasons. They were not designed to make sense from the inside. Only from the other side do you see what they were building you toward. They went back in. The music was still very loud. The evening was far from over, and neither were they. In the months after the wedding, the company grew the way that things grow when they are being built by someone who has genuinely learned the cost of shortcuts, steadily, without recklessness, one deliberate decision at a time. He hired slowly. He asked people in interviews not about ambition, but about difficulty, what they had come through, what they had learned from it, how they had behaved inside it. His team became, as a result, unusual. People who had been tested and had not broken. People who stayed, new clients came, and referrals followed, and the name of the firm began to carry weight, not the hollow weight of a name built on money, but the specific weight of a reputation built through honesty during a period when dishonesty would have been easier and more comfortable. That kind of weight does not wash off. He had become, without having planned it, the thing he had not known he was trying to become, not the most successful version of his former self. Something quieter and more durable than that, something worth being. The first major deal under the new firm closed 18 months after the wedding. Smaller in scale than the Eco-Atlantic project had been, but clean and built on a reputation earned honestly through the aftermath of collapse rather than on the momentum of a name before it. When the confirmation came through on a Tuesday morning, he stood in his office and experienced something the earlier version of himself would not have known how to name, a deep, unhurried satisfaction that had nothing to do with what anyone outside the room would say about it. He thought about the version of himself who had sat in that old frozen office watching Lagos through the glass, not knowing who to call. He felt something specific for that man, not pity, but recognition. That man had been at the beginning of something he could not see yet, a process that required him to lose what he had in order to find what he was. He called James in to tell him. James smiled the way he always smiled when something good happened fully, without holding any of it back. They shook hands. Then Min-jun told him to go home early. James said he had things to finish. Min-jun said they would still be there tomorrow. James said yes, sir, with the tone of a man who was going to stay and finish them anyway. Adiz's younger sister was married the following spring, and Min-jun and Adiz sat on the same side of that celebration that they had once only watched from the outside, as a settled, visible, uncomplicated part of the family. His mother came for the wedding. This was her second visit to Lagos, and the difference from the first was noticeable to everyone who had witnessed both. She arrived less carefully. She moved through the city with something approaching familiarity. She had opinions about the food, which she shared, which Mama Ngozi received with amusement and occasional disagreement. The two mothers spent most of the evening together at the reception. Nobody knew exactly what they talked about. Translation was imperfect, and both women were selective about what they chose to share. But by the end of the night, they had exchanged phone numbers and made a loose arrangement to visit each other's cities in the coming year. That everyone agreed when they heard it was remarkable. That Minjun and Adiz agreed privately was everything. There is a version of this story that could have gone differently. It is not a difficult version to imagine. In fact, it is the more predictable version, the one that the statistics and the social pressures and the conventional wisdom would all have pointed toward. When the money left, she could have left too. Nobody would have called her wrong. The circumstances changed significantly. She had not agreed to the hard version when she agreed to the relationship, but she stayed. And what her staying did, beyond the obvious things, beyond what it meant to him in the moments he needed it, was that it permanently changed the shape of the life they built after. Because he knew with the specific certainty that only comes from having been tested, that what he had was not contingent, that she had not chosen the version of him that things had been easy for. She had chosen him, the actual him. Including the failure and the fear and the egusi eaten in a small apartment by candlelight because the electricity had gone. That knowledge went into the foundation of everything built afterward. It made things possible in him, in the business, in the marriage, that would not have been possible without the season that had seemed, from the inside, like only a loss. He woke up early one Tuesday, nothing special about that particular Tuesday, no occasion, no milestone, and lay in the quiet of the apartment and felt nothing but ordinary contentment. Not relief, which implies the absence of something bad. Not triumph, which implies a comparison. Just the flat, sufficient contentment of a man who was exactly where he wanted to be and knew it. Adiz was still asleep. Lagos was already awake outside, the generators, the early traffic, the city beginning its day with complete indifference to his private revelation, which was appropriate. The world does not pause for your healing. It continues and you continue inside it, and one morning you wake up and notice that something has changed in how it all sits on you. He got up quietly and made tea and stood at the kitchen window and watched the city begin and thought about everything that had brought him to this particular morning in this particular small kitchen in this particular life. He did not feel like he had survived something. He felt like he had arrived somewhere, and the difference between those two feelings was everything. People who knew the full story sometimes asked them how they had stayed together through something like that, how she had stayed, how he had rebuilt, how two families from opposite ends of the world had found their way to the same table and the same dance floor and the same phone numbers saved in the same phones. The honest answer was that there had been no strategy, no method, no moment of decision that was larger than all the other moments. There had only been the same choice made repeatedly, in ordinary moments and in hard ones, to stay present, to be honest, to choose the other person not because it was comfortable, but because it was true. Love is not a feeling that maintains itself. It is a practice. It requires decision and repetition and the willingness to be fully seen in conditions that are not flattering. It requires someone who will stay not because everything is fine but because you are, and because the difference between those two things is something they have decided matters more than ease. That is what they had, not a perfect story, a true one. And a true one, it turns out, is the only kind that lasts. Money will always find the people who are willing to chase it. But loyalty, the kind that does not come with conditions or a calculation attached, the kind that shows up on a Thursday afternoon with food in a flask because it has decided you should not be hungry while you are also lost, that finds you only when you deserve it. And deserving it has nothing to do with what you have. It has everything to do with who you are when you have nothing. With what you protect when there is no reward for protecting it. With the version of yourself that is still standing when everything else has been removed. That is the version that matters. That is the version she loved. And that, in the end, is the only version of any of us that is real. They would go on to have 2 children, a daughter first, then a son. The daughter had her mother's eyes and her father's habit of reorganizing any space she entered into a more logical system, which Adiz said proved that some tendencies were genetic, and Minjun said proved that the kitchen layout had always been correct. They spent some years in Lagos, and some in Seoul and some in between, the way people do when they have decided that home is not a fixed coordinate, but a condition, something created by the presence of specific people in whatever space they happen to occupy. Both cities knew them. Neither city fully contained them. Mama Ngozi visited Seoul twice and declared it cold in ways that went beyond temperature. Mrs. Park visited Lagos twice more, and the second time she arrived already knowing where the good food was, which Mama Ngozi accepted as the highest possible form of respect. James ran the Lagos office. He was very good at it. Nobody who knew him was surprised. There is a kind of love that does not announce itself. It settles in quietly, without ceremony, the way morning light fills a room. It is not the love of grand gestures or perfect timing. It is the love that shows up on the difficult Tuesday, that eats egusi in the dark when the light goes out, that stays when the reasons to stay have been significantly reduced, and staying is an act of pure decision. It is the love that reorganizes your kitchen and argues about it afterward and means it both times. It is the love that flies across the world without calling first because it wants to see the truth of things. It is the love that bows slightly at a door in Lagos on a Thursday morning because it has found, in the most unlikely place, someone worth bowing to. It is not easy and it is not comfortable and it does not come with any guarantees. But it is real, and real, in the end, is the only thing that lasts.